Hi, and welcome to this video on JSON in AL for beginners. Hi, I'm Eric, and I've gotten a lot of requests to make a video specifically on JSON. I know I've been using JSON a lot in lots of my videos, and it's a data structure that I use all the time. But I think we could do with a beginner's guide to JSON in AL. So this is it. So I think let's find some code. Here is my Visual Studio Code as usual. And I've just created a new very simple extension. I have just added one action on the sales order card. So you guys don't have to see me create an action. So this is going to be our playground for this video. So let's take a look at if we create a variable. Call it X. That's a good variable name. And then we can see that we have 4 different types, data types. That's all related to JSON. And let's talk about what's what. So actually let's start by talking about what is a JSON structure. So JSON is basically JavaScript's way of describing an object in code, and that has sort of become a standard way of handling complex data structures, especially born out of the Node and the JavaScript script world, and it's kind of taken over as the default data type in modern systems. So we don't really use XML anymore. In our company, if we need to start something and we need to create a file format for exchanging data with somebody else, and we're the designing part, we go JSON all the way. If we design something new and would present CSV or XML, and people will say that's strange, but everybody understands JSON these days. But let's actually, so how does a JSON document look? Well, in reality, we're in lock because we can just go to and take a look at our, in this case, the launch.json, because this is JSON file, and the first 2 things that we notice, hopefully, is that there are curly brackets and square brackets. And a curly bracket is a JSON object. So if we look at this, so we have JSON object, array, token, and value. So a curly bracket is always a JSON object. So let's call this obj JSON object. So if we have this one, then we can add to it. And we have things that we can add to an object. You see, we have actually 16 different overloads here. So we can add, in this case, we can add a key as a text and a value. In this case, it's Json Token. Let's ignore that for just a second. Then we can see that the value can also be a JSON object, or JSON value, JSON array, or the more standard Boolean, char, byte. Oh, hang on, you can see that. There you go. Option, in, begin, decimal, duration, text. Meaning that if to our object here we add a, let's call it field, and the values should be YouTube video. So now we have created a JSON object with one member. So if we do message, then let's actually I'll create another one and just call it txt here. Create a text variable. So now I can, so at this point, the object is just holding the object, as you can compare it to a record with one field, but it's not record, it's a JSON object. But what I can do now is I can say object, and then I can use the write to. So write this, serialize is also sometimes known as, so write this object to a text string. Oh, txt, there you go. And we can message this one out. So let's run this. I'm publishing to my local Docker here, and the action was added here. So show JSON. So now we can see that we have a, can make this bigger. We have the curly brackets, and then we have field colon with the value. So the field is named field, and the value is YouTube video. It's pretty awesome. But we can do better. So let's go back to this one, and then what we can do is that we can add another one. So let's call this for number. No, let's call it price, and then we'll add a decimal field. I'll compile this again. Process, show JSON, and now we can see that field YouTube is the same, price was the second field, colon, and then in this case there's no quotes around this, because this is actually a value also from a Java source perspective. So now our object, the curly bracket, has two fields, field and price. If we go back and look at the launch thing, then we can see, so creating version with 0.2.0, that's pretty easy. So we could easily just do add is what we just did, version, and then 0.2.0. So in this case, we are creating this thing. But the next thing here, it says configurations, colon, and then the square bracket. So the square bracket is an array, meaning that we can go and then we call it JA for JSON array. And we could add that. So items JA. So now that has been added, but we haven't put anything into it yet. So if we look again on the launch, we can see that what's inside this thing, in this case in the array, is an object, because there's a curly bracket. So let's create another object, and we can call that item. JSON object. And then we can go item.add number, and this is item 1 and 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the array, that's something how I say in Danish, array, I don't know. We also have an add, but in this case, because of it's an array, there's no naming, because now it's just a list of things. So in this case, we'll just add item. Then I could clear item and then say item add number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, and do add item again. And actually the whole thing would clear, that's pretty bad code, but if you want the explanation of that, I think I'll come up in another video real soon. So remember to subscribe, because then you'll get notified when the next video is there. So in this case, we have added 1, 2, objects, curly brackets, to an array called items. So let's see how this looks. Process show. So now our JSON gets a bit more complicated, but here you can see items, colon, and here is the square bracket, that's our array, and we can see now that we have two objects, JSON objects with the curly bracket inside the array. That's pretty cool. We could also go with let's do this, go away, and then we can say JSON add, or the array add, and we can see that in this case we added something, but we could also just add, you know, numbers 100, add 200. That's enough. So now we're not adding objects, we are adding values to the array. So in this case, it's just an array of the values. So curly brackets, an object, not curly brackets, just a value. Okay. Let's go back to this one. So right now we have used, go back up here. So now we have used array, an object. We haven't used token yet. We haven't used value yet. So to generate a JSON, this is typically all you need. As long as you can construct, so we could here, instead of, now I'm on the sales order with the intent of we could perhaps create a sales order JSON, but that would just be rec dot amount including VAT, and all that's, well, that's a flow field, but if we pretended it was calculated, then that would just get in there. So that's pretty nice. So just with those two, JSON object, JSON array, you can create most JSONs that you want to do. Let me actually just get this thing back back in business. So now we have an object, a JSON object here. But let's say that we now want to look at this object. So we could do if object dot contains. Then do object have a key called items? And we know it has one. So that actually uppercase. Sorry. Now it will return 2. So now we know that. So if we ask to object.get items, we want now we're pretending that obj object is a variable that we got from somewhere. So we got a JSON. So now we're looking inside it to get the values of it. You can see that if I move this up a bit, so now you can see that we can get that field. So in this case we'll get it, but you can see that we need to put it into a token. So what is a token? So token is kind of a wildcard. So everything is a token. if you think of this as a object model, then token is the base class, and the other ones are inherited from token. But we don't have to think of it. Think of token as a wildcard. So now we'll get token. You also saw that get actually has a Boolean return value, so I don't have to use the contain, but I did. So now token is items, and but what do we do about the token? So let's see, if we take the token, what can we do with the token? So first of all, we can ask, what is token? So is it an array, is it an object, or is it a value? So in this case, it would be an array. So we can cast it to that type. So we can say, okay, give me this token as an array, give me this token as an object, give me this token as a value. We'll get to value in a bit. So now we could do something like for each, and then we need another, I'll just call it T2. You know, if it's something with T, then it's a token. So for each T2 n token, do begin. But we can't do that because token we do not know, the compiler do not know that token is array. So we need to go and say, okay, as array. So now we're getting all the values in T2. Let me actually get this out. And we're getting it as a token again. So now this is token, but we know that each of the entries in items is an object. So now we can do, so we can actually go and say, okay, let's call this one O2, an object, and completely unrelated fact, wrong finger, wow, that is an O2 Unix workstation from the 90s. So O2 equal T2 as object. So now we have taken the token that we get from each entry in the array and say, okay, now this is normal. We could, if we were proper here, we could do if T2 is object, then let's do this. So we're making sure. One thing to consider about JSON is that it's also a quick and dirty file format. So the whole concept of schema validation and so on that we do know from XML doesn't really exist on JSON. There are some there's some implementations of it, but there's not a standard. It's not a thing. So if you're processing unknown or foreign to your system JSON, you need to do proper error handling, and certainly being able to tell that, hey, this is actually what I think it is proper. So now we have an object, and remember that the member of the item object is number here in this case. So now we could do o2.get, and we want the number field, and let's create another token. So now we get T3. So now we get the member called number. And actually, let's see what happens if we just kind of message this one out. So anybody want to guess? Put it in the comment. What do you think T3 is now? Let's run this and see if we get anything. Do we want a breakpoint? We can do a breakpoint. It's kind of luck, pure luck, if it registers a breakpoint while I'm deploying. I have found. Let's see what happens. So it says 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the value. And 2, 3, 4, 5. So what is T3? Let's try this one. So if T3 is value, then let's change this one. Message out with the word value, so we know if the case the debugger do not want to cooperate with us. Value. So now we get the last type. Let me get on this time. So we get T3 is actually a value. So how do we deal with values? Well, so we can do T3 as a value. So now it's a value. So now it's the, let's actually create one. V for JSON value. So instead of doing it in here, let's go here and then say V equal T3 as value. So what can we do with a value? Well, values is pretty cool because we can convert it to the true data types of Business Central. So I could say that, okay, I want this as a date. If it was a date, I want it as a code, as a char, as a bar boolean. Did I say as a bar? As time, as text, and so on. So in this case, I would do as code, I think, because that was probably it. So we can do a message value as code. There we go. Run this. So now it's a proper code. And demonstrating this with text is kind of ridiculous. So let's make it a bit more interesting. So let's do, instead of let's turn number into a date instead. So 2/2020 11/10D and 2020 11/12D. There you go. So now let's run this and see. So now we have as code. So how will it handle a date as code? It'll probably just show the date as it were. So that looks like a date, but that's not a proper date. So let's actually make this a proper date. So if we do this as date, and then let's make it a bit more interesting here, so you can see. So let's do a calc date, because we cannot do calc date on a text string. So calc date plus 5D, comma, our value as a date. Let's run, compile, deploy. 15 and 17, and I think, if I remember correctly, I took the 10th and the 12th. So JSON value is actually pretty cool in both getting to and from the JSON format into the true data types. So to repeat, before this video gets way too long, we have 4 data types for handling JSON. We have JSON objects. That's whenever you need to create something with a curly bracket, and everything, the root of a JSON structure is typically always a curly bracket. I think it can start with JSON with an array. I'm not sure. If you know, let me know in the comments below. But curly brackets, that's a JSON object. Square brackets, that's a JSON array. A quoted key is a field you add it to objects, and either when you do the add. So we can also in let me actually do one more thing. So in this case we had price. So if I use my value, then I can also actually use the set value function, and suddenly this one has all the data types. So I could do vset value something and then set the price field to this JSON value instead of the ring, but this will do the exact same thing as what I had just before. This becomes very handy if you're working with record refs and stuff like that. So when it's more dynamic what you do. So JSON object, curly bracket, JSON array, square bracket, JSON values for when you mainly for when you're getting data out of a JSON, and the last one, JSON token, that's your wildcard. So every time you ask for something, you get a token, and then you can look at the token and see, well, is it an object? Is it a value? Is it an array? And then you can use the as function to turn it into that. So we have prototype casting all the way. That's JSON in AL for beginners. Let me know if there's something you want me to cover that I didn't cover in this. We're at almost half an hour, so I think this is proper time to stop. Hope you enjoyed it. If you do, subscribe to your channel. Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, have a wonderful day.